In our us versus them world, how can we engage with and minister to people with differing beliefs in a way that truly honors God? In this episode, I am joined by Terry Crist. Terry is the co-lead pastor of City of Grace in Phoenix, along with his wife, Judith. Terry is passionate about the beauty of the gospel and its power to transform communities. His most recent book is entitled Loving Samaritans. Together, Terry and I explore how we as ministry leaders can live lives of radical kindness and inclusivity without compromising our beliefs or the truth of the gospel. Terry shares from his own experiences and ministry how to find common ground with those who have differing beliefs and extend grace to them as you share the love of Christ. Are you ready? Let's go. Hey friends, welcome to another exciting episode of FrontStage BackStage. I'm your host, Jason Daye. Each and every week, I have the distinct privilege of sitting down with a trusted ministry leader, and we dive into a conversation, all in an effort to help you and pastors and ministry leaders just like you embrace a healthy rhythm for both life and ministry. We are proud to be a part of the Pastor Serve Network, and along with every episode, our team creates an entire toolkit that is freely available to you and to your ministry leadership team at your local church. And there are a ton of different resources to dig more deeply into the conversation that we're about to have. You'll find links to resources and tools. You'll also find a ministry leader's growth guide, which includes questions for reflection for you and for your ministry leaders to process through and to really grow more deeply around this topic. So be sure to check that out at pastorserve.org/network. Now, our team at Pastor Serve loves walking alongside of pastors and ministry leaders. This is what we do day in and day out all year round. And we are offering complimentary coaching session to pastors and ministry leaders. And you can learn more about that at pastorserve.org/free session. If you'd like to find out what is it like to have a ministry coach and to dive into a conversation, please check that out, pastorserve.org/free session. Now, for those of you joining us on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and take a moment to drop your name and the name of your church in the comments below. We love getting to know our audience better, and our team will be praying for you and for your ministry. Whether you're following us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please be sure to subscribe and to follow so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. I'm excited about today's conversation. At this time, I'd like to welcome Terry Crist to the show. Terry, welcome.
Hey, Jason, thanks for the invitation to be with you today. Looking forward to our conversation. And before we jump in, let me just say thank you for what you and your team offer to the church at large. I've had a few minutes to poke around your website to explore some of your resources, and you guys are doing an outstanding work in an essential space. So from my heart to yours, thank you for what you do to serve the church.
Thank you, Terry. That is so appreciated. And our team loves words of encouragement like that, because a lot of the work that we do can be very challenging. As all of us in ministry, we're all facing challenges. And together, Terry, we are going to dive in and talk about some of the challenges that we're facing as pastors and ministry leaders, kind of in the day and age that we live, right? Society is interesting, to say the least, in these days. We've seen a lot, really, even just over the last decade or so. And just conversations, postures, there tends to be oftentimes, Terry, we see some divisiveness around conversations. People are holding on to things kind of tightly, including their opinions and their thoughts and their beliefs. But Terry, you, as a pastor, ministry leader, and someone who is just kind of trying to live out, not just talk about what Jesus taught, but live out what Jesus taught. I've really been honing in on some of these conversations around specifically how do we engage with people who may not believe the way we believe, right? How do we do that in a winsome way? How do we do that in a God-honoring way? How do we do that in a way that helps people get a taste of Jesus and inch closer to Jesus rather than kind of pushing them away. And so there's a lot to be said around this conversation, but you've recently written a book called Loving Samaritans, where you dive into kind of this world from a variety of different ways. I mean, there's richness in what you write, brother, and I've shared with you that it's very impactful. But to start off, Terry, could you begin by helping us think through, perhaps, as a pastor, as a ministry leader, why are we seeing more challenges to finding common ground, to have a conversation with someone who believes differently, versus maybe getting a little defensive in regard to what we believe versus what someone else believes, right? I mean, I think it's a good place to start.
Well, let me first of all just affirm that I agree with you. I think we are living in highly divided and polarized times. And I tend to go back and forth on this because I'm a fifth generation pastor. I love the church. I love everything about God's intention. I realize that our story is a bit complicated and that there are times when we're not at our best and church hurt is a real thing. And I get all that, but I love God's idea, love his intention. And when I sit with my father and going back years with my grandfather, listening to their challenges in ministry, it's apparent that we're living in really unique times. And I tend to go back and forth, on one hand, thinking that these are the most divided times in history. And then I kind of push back and take a look at the times into which the gospel landed, the world into which Jesus was born, the complexity of that day, the power of empire, faith on the margins, occupation and oppression and human sexuality, and just all that went into that world that Jesus was born into. And I'm then mindful of the fact that maybe these aren't the most divided times, but they are divided. I do think one of the things that makes these times unique is the technological advantage or disadvantage, depending on your perspective, that we have. The fact that division is front and center, the fact that we're all connected and hyper-connected across the planet. So we are consistently aware of the divisions in our world. The white noise is unceasing. And also the fact that I think many, and this breaks my heart, Jason, but I think there are many, and unfortunately, some within our fraternal community, within the church and with our colleagues, who have made division a virtue. And they're using it as an instrument to build whatever it is that they're building. And that breaks my heart, because throughout history, division has been seen for what it is. It's of another kingdom. It's of another spirit. And it doesn't advance the church. And it certainly isn't a long-term game. So I want to see us as pastors recover what it means to love each other. And we can talk about loving our communities, but let's love other churches in town. Let's love the church in general, the capital C church. And let's find a way in these times to be reminded of the idea that we're all on the same team as pastors. We desperately need each other when faith is declining with the rise of the nuns and the duns. Our relationships with other pastors in the community are perhaps as valuable, if not more valuable than ever.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that, Terry. And as we look at that idea of locking arms with other pastors, other ministry leaders in our communities, in our cities, there is this sense that some people fear locking arms with others because they don't necessarily agree 100% with everything that particular pastor, that particular church, upholds. Speak into that for us a little bit, Terry, because there are nuances, right? From, different kind of streams of tradition within the Christian church. We know this.
Sure.
It's not a surprise to any of us in ministry. But it seems like that gap, that chasm is being more pronounced. I don't know if that's widening actually, but that chasm is being more focused upon, it seems, from some ministry leaders. Talk to us a little bit about kind of navigating that? What's healthy there? What's unhealthy? How do we process that a bit?
Sure. I think it's clear that we live in a tribal world, and we've always been a tribal world. I mean, from the earliest of days, we've sought out relationship with one another for a wide variety of reasons. There's nothing wrong with tribes. We're all tribal in 1,000 different ways. And even ancient Israel was tribal by design. But within the beauty of the tribes of Israel, there was diversity, and there was also a sense of commonality, a connection, a commitment to togetherness, to one another. And when I look at the landscape of the church today, I think one of the big challenges, not just that we exist in tribes, but tribalism then perceives the other to be a threat, perceives the other to be something or someone to be eliminated. And that makes it really, really difficult to reach a community, especially given the fact that Jesus taught us that it's our love for one another that is, in fact, our most powerful witness. So we're not going to be more effective in reaching the world through refining our doctrinal statements or building bigger platforms or any of the things that we do. And by the way, I'm all about attractional and missional church because I think both have their place. But we're not going to improve upon methodology that results in reaching the world. What we do have the opportunity to do is to exemplify the kind of love that bears witness to the grace of God. The kind of love that says not only to others within the church, you matter, but to the very people around me who don't believe what I believe, and in some cases may even stand in opposition to what I believe, and yet I see them for who they are, image bearers, created in the image of a loving God who desires to reach them with his grace and to love them into a life-changing relationship. And of course, all this is something that I unpack in the book, Loving Samaritans, because I think it is a model for cultural engagement, not just a picture of Jesus reaching a woman at a well in Samaria, not just a picture of him engage with her in what were some of the most provocative topics of the time, but a model for what it means for us to reach and connect with others.
Yeah, I love that. And in Loving Samaritans, Terry, you help us look at this idea of common ground. When we have friends, family members, coworkers, whoever it might be, and actually finding this common ground and kind of starting there and engaging there, which is the flip opposite of what we're seeing in society to such a degree, right? So as pastors and ministry leaders, what are some things that we need to keep in mind when we're engaging with culture, when we're engaging with society, when it comes to this idea of common ground?
I think fundamentally, to a large degree, we all want the same thing. And so here I am today, engaged with you in this podcast in a high-rise building. I'm on the 14th floor. You can see the city out behind me here. And it's always really interesting for me to look into the camera, see the city behind me, because it brings me back to the idea that if as pastors, our hearts are not big enough for that entire city there to fit in, for every person there to be situated in, then we really need to do some interior work. And so much of what I talk about in Loving Samaritans is really fundamentally about spiritual formation. It's about the interior work that we need to do to create the kind of lives that are big enough for everyone to find their respective place in. And when we do that, when we do the kind of work that makes room for people unlike us, then it positions us, I believe, by God's grace to have conversations with them. The common ground that we all have and share is that we fundamentally want the same thing. We want to be at peace. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be loved. We want to be valued. We want to raise families that flourish and the kind of kids that move beyond what we've accomplished in our life. I think there are more things that we have in common with the community around us than what we realize. And if we begin to identify them, not just the pain points in our community, but the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of our neighbors, that opens a whole new world of rich conversations. And the gospel flows along the lines of those sort of conversations. So I think it's a matter of looking around and saying, not just who are these people, but what do these people want out of life, and what do we share in common?
Yeah, that's helpful, Terry. Now, practically speaking, what does that look like in your life as a pastor, as a ministry leader, and in the lives of those people, even in your church? How do you encourage them to live into this idea that we are engaging in these kind of conversations? We are living in life together. We are focusing on those things that we have most in common. What does that practically look like?
What does it practically look like? Well, it looks like going through our day with our eyes wide open and our hearts wide open, looking for those moments of opportunity in which we can see people and truly see people and connect with them in a deep and a fundamental way. And we all have these opportunities on a daily basis, whether it's at the, in the boardroom, the lunchroom, in an elevator, in a coffee shop. I'm really encouraging people to be present to the moments that we're in throughout the day, because I think for many of us, we just tend to live life on autopilot. And I did this for years. Part of the story that I share in Loving Samaritans is how that my wife and I went from living in the suburbs, as we all sort of do, I think, many of us anyhow. We start, with a small family, and as your kids grow, you look for a little more space, and more often than not, that pushes you out to the edge of a city, because living in the city can be complicated. And so we ended up in a little bedroom community called Fountain Hills. And as with so many other people, we would drive through our neighborhood, wave at our neighbors, pull into our garage, get out of our car, go into the house, spend the evening, next morning, get back in the car, back out of the driveway, wave at our neighbors, and go about our day. And we reached a point in time where that we said, look, God has been kind and gracious to us, and our church has experienced growth, and we've gone from a single site. In fact, we'd grown from meeting in our living room to a single site, to multi-site, to being in a couple of states. And along with that, we were engaged in resourcing our staff, raising up leaders and equipping and empowering them to serve our communities. But we wanted to get back into rolling up our shirt sleeves and putting our hands in the dirt. So we left that suburban bedroom community and moved right into the heart of the city. And it has been illuminating to me to rediscover just how that I was living life on autopilot. And by seeing people, by opening the door to conversations with people, it really leads to getting to know them. And the gospel, more often than not, flows along the lines of conversations.
Yeah, that's incredible. And when we think about the idea of putting ourselves in a position where we can have conversations with people, I think that's key, because oftentimes in ministry we can insulate ourselves, right, Terry?
Right.
To a point where we're not having these conversations with people, where we're not really engaging in some of these deeper conversations. One of the things that you touch on in
and if I could just build on that,
please.
I was just going to say, and then what ends up happening is that we tend to look at people as groups. We see them
Exactly.
in categories, and that then leads to this depersonalization, and sometimes in the worst cases, even a dehumanization. So we end up with the idea that all people are blank.
Right.
And we can fill in, both of those blanks. All blank are blank. All people all are blank. And I've discovered so many times that the stereotypes that we hold, these ideas of everyone being the same as a collective, are rooted in the lack of conversations, the lack of deep listening. And I'm not just talking about surface conversations, but I'm talking about deep listening. I'm talking about the second and third and fourth conversation that really gets to the heart of what people fear and what people long for. A curiosity is something that is I think, largely absent from the church because we filled in these blanks, presuming that we know what people are thinking. And as we do that, the more we fill in the blanks with our stereotypes, the further and further that we get from the communities that we should be deeply embedded in. What I love about Jesus is that he was a master listener. I mean, I love so much about Jesus, right?
Right.
But to this point, I love the fact that he saved me. But he's a master listener. He was able to sit with people, and and that didn't mean that he always answered their questions. You know, there are something like 113 questions asked of Jesus in the Gospels, and he only answers 2 or 3 of them. So he knows the art of the segue. He knows the art of the pivot. He knows how to take a conversation and to move it to a deeper place so it doesn't just sit at the surface level. And these are some of the really important values that I would love to see leaders develop. Get out of the office. Get off the campus, bro. Get out of the office, sis, and go into a coffee shop. And I don't mean take your laptop and your big family Bible there and prep your sermon, because that's kind of what we do. You know, I'm in a coffee shop and I'm prepping my sermon and I'm looking at people and I'm thinking, what might their needs be? What might their fears be? Leave the Bible home every now and then, leave the laptop home every now and then, and just be curious in engaging with people. And I don't think I can emphasize this enough, because that sense of curiosity then brings about a connection that leads to a conversation, and a conversation leads to a relationship, and a relationship leads to time and investment. And this is so important, because if we start our evangelism initiatives there, then the chance is highly likely that we'll move from that conversation into not just seeing their conversion over time, which is what we want, right? But then the foundation for discipleship is already laid. But when we rely on the old efforts in evangelism, you know, the tracks, I was sitting at a stoplight not far from here years ago with my window down, and somebody drove by and threw a track in the window, and it landed on my lap. I thought I'd been shot for a minute. And as they drove off and I picked it up, it was one of those great old classic Jack T. Chick tracks.
Right.
And I thought, this was a drive-by tracking, you know. But what often happens is when we reduce our evangelism down to these impersonal methods, or even the big altar calls, which I love, and every weekend we see people come to faith in Jesus. But when we do that, we really haven't established a basis for spiritual formation. So by engaging people personally in conversations, we've already built or laid the foundation for then the transformation of their whole life, the formation of their spiritual life, their discipleship. So it begins there by, again, just getting out in the community. And that means we have to get off the campus every now and then, or every day, as is the case for me.
Yeah, that's good, Terry. And as you're saying that, I was thinking through, when you're having real conversations with real people, when you're putting yourself in that position and you're engaging in those things, that is a smaller, more finite approach to ministry in many ways, rather than the, big mass, how many people can we, tell them that Jesus loves you, right? So, which is interesting, Terry, as we think through this, because it seems like so much of technology and methodology in many ways is moving and has been moving, and kind of the training, the excitement, the buzz is around this idea of, hey, reaching the entire world, right? Mm-hmm. It's reach the entire world. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Jesus calls us to that.
Sure.
But there's something very, very real about not worrying so much about reaching the entire world, but reaching that one person who lives on your block, right? Or that one person that's in the coffee shop every day, same time you're in the coffee shop every day. Kind of taking it down, and it goes back to Jesus. If we think about Jesus at the well with the Samaritan woman, in that moment, he wasn't strategizing a way to share the gospel with the entire world, in some mass way, but he was modeling what sharing the gospel really should look like, right? In a single conversation. So help us think through that, Terry, a little bit, because there's often a push for more, bigger, better, right? All of those types of things. How can we look at ministry today in a healthy way that might balance those things, but not lose the personalization, right? The one-on-one life piece.
When I was a young pastor, I bought into the idea that the more present that I was to the one, the less present I would be to the many. So there was sort of this impersonalized approach that since we want to reach the whole world, as you've referenced here, and since we want to see people come to faith in Jesus, I need to stay focused on the biggest, broadest picture. I discovered over time that in connecting with the one, you actually become more effective in reaching the many. So by sitting with people, by engaging with them individually, it only enhances what you do at the biggest, broadest level when you're connecting with, a congregation, or even across the link, even, on the platforms like this. So I don't think it takes anything from us to connect with people individually. But what it also adds to us is that it is the idea of this, that ours is a show and tell gospel. And oftentimes the telling part is ineffective because the showing part is absent. So as one who desires to communicate truth in a way that is effective, I'm mindful of the fact that truth has to be embodied within me. I've got to be living this out. And nobody knows if I'm living out the gospel any better than the people in my house and the people who live next door to me. So that puts in this sense of accountability into the system. I'm not living out in the suburbs and driving into my church and preaching to people who don't live with me, who aren't doing the journey with me. But I'm actually engaged with them on a daily basis. I think it makes us all more effective ministers of the gospel to do exactly that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We don't want to lose out on that, on connecting with people on a personal level, because again, it goes back to what you said earlier. You referenced the idea that we just kind of look at every X type of person as just this big monolithic something, instead the reality of individuals and what that means. So I think it's helpful in Loving Samaritans. You talk about this idea of envisioning our local churches as communal wells where Jesus would feel welcome to sit and engage in meaningful conversations, which that's one of the things I highlighted out of the book, brother. And awesome. I love that. But talk to me a little bit about, you go on to say that tragically this vision of what our local churches might look like is far from reality in many ways. So right. Talk to us a bit about that spiritual wealth.
So if I can, let me talk, just kind of set it up by how Jesus ends up in Samaria by the well. Because in the Gospel of John, we have these two significant stories that are close together, but are bookends of this moment in the life of Jesus. And so the first in John chapter 3 is he meets with Nicodemus. He engages with the Pharisee. And it's very, very important to know that Jesus loved Pharisees as well. And then from there, we see something really interesting happening. And that is that the disciples are baptizing people, and the Pharisees then begin to stir up this debate with them. And the controversy is over who is baptizing more people. So the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? I mean, these baptismal wars, this competition over who has the biggest church, it goes all the way back to this moment. And the scripture says that Jesus leaves Judea to go to the Galilee. Now, I didn't realize this, and I wish I had of, but it was only after that I wrote the book, I began looking at it in a few different translations. And one translation says that he fled. So there's something about Jesus that doesn't want to sit in these moments, these competitive moments with brother against brother and church against church. He flees that sort of moment. And then the scripture tells us he has to go to Samaria. Well, we know he doesn't literally have to go there. There's an alternative route, but the Spirit leads him to do this. So he ends up at a well there that is the site of so much pain in the gospel, in the Old Testament. It's a story, first of all, a rich story. Without getting too far off point here, this well represents Abraham's initial journey. It represents Joseph when he was sold into slavery. Jacob has his moment at the well. His daughter Dinah is raped not far from the well. So this is not just any ordinary well. It is a well with a significant backstory. And I think Jesus chooses this well because of what it represents. It represents our apartment buildings. It represents our neighborhoods. It represents the world that we live in, where people are broken and they're disenfranchised and they're hurting. And they may live under this thin veneer of pretense that projects everything is okay. But just a few minutes with them in an honest conversation, and you'll find for most people, they're far from being okay. And there Jesus has the conversation with her that opens her up, and he spends a lot of time engaging with her. From there, she then goes back into the village. And I love this. The villagers come to Jesus and he has a conversation with them. And from the longest recorded conversation in the Gospels with the woman, Jesus disappears into a small community for 2 days. And we don't know what happened. We don't know. The contrast is striking. From the longest conversation, there are 2 days missing in his itinerary. But we do know that it frames his ongoing love affair with the other, with the Samaritans. And all through his ministry, he goes out of his way to connect with the Samaritans. And at one point, even when a Samaritan village rejects him and the disciples want to call down fire on it, as if they could, Jesus says, don't do that. And it all culminates with him ascending then and giving them the instructions just before the ascension. I want you to go to Judea and Jerusalem, Judea. And by the way, don't forget, my friends, the Samaritans. So this begins Jesus's love affair with the other. And I think that for many of us, we tend to hang out with people like us. We're in our echo chambers. We're trapped in our algorithms. Our belief systems are curated and being reinforced. But how much richer would our lives be for getting out of those things and engaging with people unlike us? Who is it on your block that is radically unlike you? And what might you discover through a conversation? Well, some might say, yeah, I want to get to know people because I want to take Jesus to them. But I'm not sure that we ever take Jesus anywhere that he isn't already present. The idea isn't to take Jesus to the world. The idea is to find out where Jesus is already active in the lives and stories of people. And as the old Blackaby line goes, to join him in his work. I need to walk through my day looking for the traces of grace, the evidences of the way that God is already working in my story, in the lives of people around me, in my community. Because I'll guarantee you one thing, regardless of how hard the community is, and every one of us feel like our community is the hardest to break ground in, God's already at work there. He's engaged in the lives of people far from him. If you were to dust their life, you'd find the fingerprints of God all over them. And the thing that we need to do as leaders is to walk through our day asking the question, where is God at work? Where are the traces of grace in the lives of my neighbors? And how can I build on that? How can I discern that? And how can I engage God in the work? Because from there, God brings about the transformation of the human heart. Not only do we not take Jesus anywhere, but we don't convert anyone. So
Right.
Let's be mindful of who does.
That's awesome, Terry. I love that. And as we're looking at that, as we're thinking through that, processing through that, and what that looks like in our lives as pastors and ministry leaders, one of the things that you touch on is kind of this, this idea of judgment-free zones, right? This idea of when we're engaging in these conversations with the other, right? With people who do not align with our belief systems, or have completely different backgrounds, or they're carrying baggage that we're like, man, you got to ditch that baggage, or whatever it might be. There can be a challenge to, as much as we want to say we want to embrace people and welcome people with open arms, there is that challenge that we will judge. We do judge. We do kind of, put those things up and don't make it as accessible or as inviting for people to be real. Terry, how can we as pastors and ministry leaders work on that idea of that judgment-free zone and how that might look and show up in our lives, in our ministries, and how we can kind of impart that to the people God's entrusted to us in our local congregations?
You're right. We not only do this with our communities, but sometimes we do this within our own families. We find it really, really hard to just hold judgment. And I'm not talking about any sort of reworking of truth. I believe in the timelessness of Scripture. I believe in the inspiration of Scripture. And I believe in the timely application of it in the lives of people. But I'm also mindful of the fact that Jesus didn't download everything to his disciples in a single conversation. In fact, there was this one point in time where he says, there is much I could tell you, but you cannot bear it now. And yet for many of us in ministry, we feel the need to give all the truth in every conversation to every single person. And for me, I have to remind myself that number one, this is not my gospel. So I can take my ego off the table. This is not my gospel. If they don't receive God's plan for their life, this is not some failure on my part. And ultimately, the best thing I can do is to, again, not give up my convictions and my deep beliefs, but to make space for people to have these kinds of questions, these kinds of conversations. The kind of conversation where that even when someone says, I don't believe what you believe, I don't accept your way of life, rather than defensively reacting against that, to get to that, to affirm that, that's not unusual in today's world. But what might that be rooted in? Where does that come from? Does that come from some sort of belief system that was formed in them as a child? Or does it come from church hurt? Does it come from their perception that all pastors are hypocrites and that everybody in a church, is out to take away their freedom? What does it come from? And sometimes our defensiveness kicks in. And when our defensiveness kicks in based on fear, based on the weight of responsibility, feeling like their conversion is on us individually, then we rush to judgment. But I think if we would create the kind of environment, both in our home and in our churches and in our communities, where we just, again, are willing to listen to where people are coming from, that it leads to a refining of our questions. And sometimes it leads to a tailoring of the message, not a transformation of the message, but to applying the message to them in a way that answers their need. And we see Jesus doing this through the Gospels. Even though the gospel is one size fits all, he communicates it relative to the context and relative to the individual person at that specific moment in time. So there's a lot we can learn from that when it comes to evangelism. But as it comes to showing grace to other people, we don't have to be afraid of letting them share their opinions. If you listen to people's pain deep enough, sometimes they'll even see the roots of their pain and sometimes the way out of their pain when you allow them to share the deepest parts of their heart.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Terry. Terry's, we're kind of winding this down, and this again, I've just really enjoyed Loving Samaritans. Absolutely amazing book, brother, and just the posture, the heart posture that you bring to this conversation, I think is so important today. So thank you for that. I would love to give you just a little bit of time, Terry, just to share some words of encouragement to brothers and sisters who are, serving the church, serving in ministry leadership. What words would you share with them today?
Couple of things. First of all, my heart behind the book is to create a basis for conversation, for dialogue, and for thoughtfulness with leaders. I don't offer a lot of methodologies and simple practical steps. And I know there's a place for all of that, but I feel like I'm talking about something that is much more fundamental, and that is the way that we've been formed. Ours is a gospel that is shaped in love, a cruciform life that emanates from an interior place of transformation. And if we give the people in our congregations methodologies, if we give them quick and easy steps to evangelize their neighbors, then when the culture shifts around us and the conversation shifts, they're left unequipped and unarmed. But if we teach them what it means to live this life that is shaped in love and flows along the lines of love, then that never goes out of style. That is timeless and effective. And then I would also encourage pastors with this. You're probably doing better than what you realize. You probably are more fruitful than what you can see in any given moment. The world has changed for all of us, and all of us are trying to find how to minister effectively, how to be fruitful and to flourish in a way that is contextual to the moment that we find ourselves in. And few people are further ahead than what any of us are. We're all in this moment together. And I just want to encourage pastors to be faithful to where you are, to love your community well, to be the best neighbor that you can be. Because at the end of the day, I don't know what your eulogy is going to sound like. I don't know what the people in the church are going to say about your Bible preaching or teaching or your administrative skills, or whether or not you were effective in your stand-up comedy bits on the weekend. But I promise you one thing: if you touch your neighbors, if you love your neighbors, if you invest into your neighbors, then your neighbors are going to have some really extraordinary things to say about you. And that's what this comes back down to. When Jesus could have summarized God's plan using any language in the universe, he said, this is about loving God and loving your neighbor, even as you love yourself. So let God love you. If you're feeling any deficit in your own life and you're feeling like you're drawing out of an empty well, then let God love you. Let God affirm you. Sit in his presence and know that you are his beloved child. And from that place of being loved deeply, love others deeply.
Yeah, excellent, brother. What a great word. So encouraging, Terry. Brother, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Thank you for putting pen to paper and wrestling with God and over Loving Samaritans and just again the heart posture in that book. We will have links to the book in the toolkit for this episode. You can find that pastorserve.org/network, along with lots of other resources there. So be sure to check that out. Brother, it has been an absolute joy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the time.
It's been an honor. God bless you and the work that you guys are doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. God bless you, brother. Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.